All right, now I'm going to show you how to nature journal succulents. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the families. I'm pretty sure this is not one of the poisonous ones. Succulents are not all in the same family. And I'm going to go on a rant about that and cactus a little bit later. But right now, I'm going to show you how to nature journal succulents. And I'm here in an area with lots of cool succulents. That is San Diego, California. And many of you may not be in such a climate as that right now this time of year. But succulents are something that a lot of people have growing inside their house. They're very common, very easy to work with, and so a perfect subject for nature journaling. I think sometimes because they're such a commonplace plant category that we won't necessarily nature journal them, but I think they're great. So first thing I'm going to do is take out my journal, get into my comfy seat, and I'm nature journaling these succulents outside, but you could probably nature journal them inside as well because people do grow them as a houseplant. I'm going to put these, I love these bulldog clips if you've watched any of my videos. Even if you're not in very windy conditions, they help just hold the paper flat and prevent this kind of thing where you accidentally smash the corner of your paper, which I did earlier because I didn't have my clips on yet. But those are really great and you can get them anywhere. I usually try to carry at least 3, if not 4. Really good when you're using watercolor also because the paper doesn't buckle. So the first thing I'm going to do, and some of you might have seen the video that I did on Instagram where I nature journaled some succulents, and I just did an I noticed I wonder it reminds me of in a basic sketch. This would be a good place to start. I've got this pot full of succulents here in front of me. The other option would be to do sort of like a bigger scene and try to get sort of just almost like a landscape-ito of what I'm looking at here, sort of the big picture, which is really important in nature journaling, is to zoom in and zoom out. So capturing the big picture of all of the succulents planted together, that would be one approach. And then just doing sort of like an I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of looking at one plant or even a part of one plant, dissecting a piece, doing something like that. Some diagrams, those are all a couple of ideas. So to tell you the truth, I think I'm going to actually start with sort of like a landscape-ito, looking that way, and I'll set it up so that you can see as I'm drawing with my document camera. So let's get it set up for that. And then if you have any questions, I'm going to try to pay attention to the comments area, but won't be able to see that well. So let me switch cameras here and see if you can see. I'm going to be looking that way basically, but I'll set up the camera for you to watch as I draw, hopefully. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to switch cameras and show you where I'm drawing. Show you my drawing itself, actually. All right, there's my paper right there. Is that in focus or not? How does that look? Can you see? Okay, so I'm going to start off by creating sort of a frame here to keep all of my information in one area. Okay. This is the first time that I've used this document camera in a live video, I think. I just got it. It's a pretty low-end one, but hopefully it'll help with my recordings. Okay, so now I'm just going to try to simplify what I see here because there's a lot of complexity in these plants, but I don't want to show that. There's a little bit of rock garden here, so maybe I'll just give that for context. I'm not going for realism here. I'm going for a sense of the place. There are also these pokey ones. How can I simplify that shape? Not really going for precision here. And just drawing in this little bit of this agave right there. And then there's another one right next to it. And then there's the cactus back there. And then there's these other ones with the bigger, wider leaves here in the front. So all plants have a leafing pattern, and some are more regular than others. And as you learn your different plants, like a lot of people already know what the simplified version of a Christmas tree looks like, or you have like a cartoon version of that in your head. Similar to that, there's other patterns that can be repeating that are shorthand. I like to use the word shorthand for that. So instead of looking at every single detail of that plant, your brain already has this sort of idea of what that pattern looks like, a shorthand version of it, and you can just repeat that over and over in different places on your drawing to create that effect. And most people can visually read that shorthand. So in drawing, I think it's important to use that concept or that term of reading. I think it's really important because certain things like these, for example, if I say that you read them as a plant, that means that you, the viewer, interpret them as a plant. So when we're drawing things and trying to simplify things maybe, or get to the essential of what creates the visual effect we want, it has to do with whether or not the viewer can read what our drawing is trying to show. Okay, so this is cactus over here. And like I said, this is just kind of like a establishing shot, so to speak, would be what you would call it in cinematography. And this just gives the feeling. And then up here, like I could write succulents in block letters up there, bubble letters, which I'll probably do. So I'm not too worried about, this being perfect, especially with these kind of plants, some of these, the pattern is so precise on them that it's really hard to get them correct unless you do some, work with like a compass or some real measurement or calculation. Some of these plants you can't get perfect, but you can at least give the feeling for it. So I have another kind of jade plant like succulent over here. Those are really easy to draw, obviously. A good thing to have to start with maybe would be one of these jade plants because they're so simple. The leaves are so big and fat. I mean, it's like, talk about a perfect, easy thing to draw. And the way they branch is so regular. I'll talk about that a little bit later when I get into some of the botany. So let me know if there's some of the questions about botany that you have. I'm not super expert, but I will talk some about some of the plant families that I know that are included in these categories that we created of succulents. There's sort of like this aloe over there and some little stuff. And I'm going to use color. Color is another good shorthand that people use and abuse. So just because it's a plant doesn't necessarily mean it's green, but green is a really good shorthand or signifier for plants, and most people recognize that. So if you just take a bunch of green and put it on sort of like a cloud looking thing and make a brown stick going into it, a lot of people will look at that and interpret it as a plant or a tree, even though it might not be realistic or accurate to a specific tree. All right, I think that's going to be good for that. And then I don't think I'm going to do anything in the background. Maybe I'll just so I'm going to do a little watercolor here. This is getting me warmed up. It's creating an establishing shot. Oh yeah, I'm going to put my title in first. So up here I'm going to write succulents. So sometimes it's good to space out your letters before you do them, or at least know. So like, see, I already committed, but I should have checked this first, is to see if you have any lowercase letters that go below the line, because like if I had a Y here, I would be screwed because it would have to come down into this frame, and I didn't plan for that when I drew in that S. I would have to do the thing where you bounce your, I can put my lowercase letters on an imaginary line up here. But anyways, doing some thought before you write out your words is useful, but the more you get used to it, the easier it is just to do you know, nice writing or bubble letters or calligraphy or font in the field without having to think about it too much. But one thing I noticed, I definitely make a lot more misspellings when I'm nature journaling, and I try not to worry about it too much. And I also make a lot more misspellings when I'm filming and talking and writing at the same time. All right, succulents. And with time, you'll develop your own sort of style probably with your writing and what kind of font you use or bubble letters or whatever, or calligraphy. And just don't be too hard on yourself. You don't need to, you know, sign up for a bunch of calligraphy classes right away if that's something that you're not going to actually follow through on. It's not totally necessary. I'm going to put in a little bit of metadata over here before I do my color. I kind of have a bad composition going here with this page. Feels a little bit weird. I'm going to have to figure out how to do something with that. But I think right now I'm just going to put like a square here, and see how I didn't make it line up with that same one. It'd be a little bit, it'll just be a little bit more interesting if these aren't having these lines on the same exact level. Okay. And what's today's date again? I think it's the 27th. 20, it's cold for San Diego, December. It's like 62 maybe. Freezing, 63 degrees Fahrenheit, light breeze. So this is just, even though I'm just nature journaling, you know, succulents, it's good to just get in the habit of doing metadata. And I'm going to write could rain tonight. Getting in the habit of doing this metadata is really useful. Oh, Ricky Edrington is asking about my pen. This is the Pilot pen. I've done reviews on this before. You can find reviews of this. If you look up brush pen review on my YouTube, I have reviews of this Pilot pen, and it has gray on one side and black on the other side. It's my favorite pen personally. Right now I've been using them. There's downsides, but anyways, go to the review, brush pen reviews. I have multiple reviews about brush pens, and this one's my favorite right now. Okay, so got in that metadata, you know. It also creates an aesthetic effect. So it's like, don't forget that, you know, these things add together visually to create something nice. Okay, all right, who's ready for watercolor? Okay, I am. So I got my watercolor palette right here, and just to show you the plants that I'm drawing, maybe it'll be upside down if I do that. Maybe I can't do that. I'll show you the area I'm drawing again real quick. Just change the camera for you, and you can see what I'm looking at. So you can see these plants right there. That's what I'm going to be drawing, and you can see there's a variety of colors. None of them are exactly green, so a lot of succulents have weird colors. Some of them are even like red and pink. There's this ice plant that grows near me that turns pink, and sometimes it's hard when you're trying to simplify something in a drawing to actually see that the plant is pink, or like this plant up above me here has red leaves. And so what happens is you're no longer able to use that shorthand, what I call a shorthand, to represent a plant. So you can't just be lazy and put a bunch of green, because like look at this right here. This is a plant right here, but it's not green. So just getting in the habit of actually trying to draw what you see is a good practice for most art. So I'm gonna, now that you saw the plants, that's what I'm gonna be painting. I'm gonna switch back to the other camera, and you can see that. Okay, so now I'm going to get out my watercolor palette. And luckily this palette has a lot of good succulent colors in it already. So like this undersea green, for example, the rich green gold, those are really, there's a lot of succulents that have that color. This naphthamide maroon, I find, also is really similar to the pink color that I see in a lot of succulents. Like, where's that one? Look at this. Or sometimes it's actually just almost like a, that right there is almost like a quinacridone pink. See, no, see how, actually that's really close to the naphthalmide maroon. Look at that. The edge of this succulent leaf next to that naphthalmide maroon. I mean, that color, and then this would probably be more like a chromium oxide down here. Okay, hey, that's a cool way to match color. I've never done that before. All right, so now I'm gonna get in here. Oh yeah, baby. Okay, watercolor time. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look up here and start with my lightest color. So there's actually like a gray color. It's fairly pale with a little bit of pink in it. I'm just gonna put that in sort of as like this backgroundy color here behind the plants. And the gray ink from that pilot brush pen is slightly water soluble, which I don't mind. The only place I don't want it to smear a teeny bit or soften a teeny bit is in my, the main place I don't want that to happen is in my writing, but I don't usually do a wash over my writing. And the black ink is totally waterproof, so that's great. Okay, now I'm gonna put in a little bit of blue for the sky. I'm gonna use, this is the, which one is that? That's the manganese blue hue. I usually end up relying on that a lot, but the cobalt is also a good, this cobalt right here is also a good sky one, but this is a fictitious sky anyways, and it's actually gray. The sky is gray here anyways. But so this is a fictitious sky. I don't care. I'm gonna put it in blue. Right after I said, you know, how important it is to paint things the color that you really see them. Well, actually what's behind these is mostly asphalt from the road, so I'm not going to paint that right now. Just going to kind of simplify this. So you can make those choices. It's good to be aware and intentional about them and not just fictionalize things without thinking about it. Okay, so that's still a little bit wet. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to color in the succulents part. I'm going to clean up this mixing area right here, so I don't know exactly what color that is. It kind of looks like quinacridone. I'm going to put more quinacridone in there. Dang, I was going to fill up my, I forgot I was supposed to fill up my watercolor. I'm running out of, look at my buff titanium. Now that's just scary how little buff titanium I have. The quinacridone is pretty low too. Serpentine genuine. Gonna have to fill these up. Okay, so now I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna color this lettering and just try to keep in the lines but not too worried, and some of that gray will soften, but I don't care. It's okay. One thing is, wherever you pick up your brush is the area that will leave like a little bit more of a droplet of paint and water, and so if that drop is intentionally left at the bottom, it kind of creates the sense that these letters are weighted towards the bottom or have a shadow on the bottom, and that's preferable to give sort of like a sense, almost a sense of three-dimensionality to them. So that would make you want to paint your letters in that direction instead of ending at the top of the letter, which will leave that bump at the top, you know what I'm saying? So you can intentionally, sort of like the way I did with that E, come back around and end here at the bottom and get that little bit of extra pigment coming down to the bottom of your letter. Does that make sense? Or you can go back also. Sometimes I do that. Go back while it's still a little bit wet and just kind of add that. But see, like that one, it was a little bit too dry, and that doesn't look that great. It's a little bit too discreet. All right, so now by the time I'm done with these letters, the cool thing is that by the time I'm done with this will be ready for me to come in. So now, since I have this yellow on this sort of quinacridone gold color on my palette already and on my brush, I'm going to go ahead and see if there's any plants that kind of have a little bit of that color. I'm noticing the cactus at the top has that color a little bit, and there's a plant over here that almost has it, so I'm just going to put in a little bit. And then that way there's also some good back and forth between your colors. Like there's you can find color in different places in your composition, which helps people's eyes move around the composition. Okay, now there's sort of like a gray color on these plant stems, but I'm going to kind of tone that down a little bit and make it a little bit of a warmer color. And now I'm going to start going in with the green. So my main green is probably going to be, as usual, serpentine green. I might do just a chromium oxide, like a more blue green, less yellow green on some of the other succulents, and maybe on this agave. But first I'll start with this warm green. And ooh, it looks like that cactus has way more yellow than I was realizing. It kind of comes, it's like in streaks where the spines are. So remember, right now though, you need to simplify things, and so don't try to get all of the details and local color differences, or else you're gonna lose the overall composition. So I think I'm gonna come in here and sort of simplify these leaves, even though they have like this variegation on them. I don't want to show that. Okay. Okay, that's all right. Gonna do just the same color there. Then when that dries, I'm gonna come back with just a lighter value, a darker value on those. And so now I've got a lot of sort of similar looking greens. Now I'm gonna come in and get this chromium. Wait, no, that's the undershoot. No, I want chromium oxide. So I'm gonna get this chromium oxide, which is more of like a blue. I think it has a lot of, it has like almost like white in it, or gouache. It's more opaque, I would say, and a little bit blue. Or maybe I should have just put in actual blue. So I'm gonna come in with just this straight chromium oxide and try to get the feel of this agave plant here. I think this will work fine. Keep it simple. Simple, simple. All right, now I'll come in here. Remember, your first drawing of your session is really going to affect your motivation and your self-confidence for the rest of your nature journaling session. So think about how your drawing is going to affect your overall session, in addition to just thinking about, oh, well, I want this drawing to be really cool or really good, or whatever expectations you have around it. Think about how that drawing is going to affect the rest of your session. And so I would say starting with something that doesn't feel too hard, something that just kind of gets you moving and thinking and drawing in a variety of different ways, instead of just really focused in on one way of looking at things. All of those will help you as a warm-up drawing. So something that is not too hard, kind of open-ended, like contour drawing is a good one. Something where you don't have like too much expectation on the outcome, and then something where you're looking and drawing in a variety of different ways. So like I did watercolor, I did some sketching, I did some note-taking, some observation, and some writing. And so combining all of those in my first entry at the beginning of my entry helps just get my brain working for the rest of my nature journaling session. So now I'm going to come in here with a darker value and try to just keep these value relationships really simple, but try to give some dimensionality to these things. So I could probably go even darker than that, but I'll just try that. Do it sort of at the bottom, maybe a couple places there. Do it in here, make these look a little bit more three-dimensional. And then once I do this one, this is a second wash basically. In terms of layering of washes, I'm not going to do very many. And this cactus, I'm not too worried about it. Just kind of leave it like that. Keep it simple. This stuff over here is like this weird orange color. Weird orange color. I think I made it too dark, but whatever. Just do it like that. And then there's one really bright green thing here in the foreground. And you know, if foreground elements have more contrast, more details, more saturation, more warmth, then they come out to the foreground. If they're cooler, less contrast, less saturated, and less details, then they fade into the background. Okay, so that being said, let me come in here and put some contrast in the front, just maybe some shadows in these rocks here. And, whoa, that's a lot of contrast. So when you have contrast or dark things, it brings attention to them. So you don't want to overdo it. And a little bit like that. But I think that's enough to kind of bring the foreground out, maybe a little bit of texture, aka details. One of the things that the foreground should have more of and the background should have less of. Okay, and then warmth too. So if I put anything warm in the front, like maybe I could put some orange, or oh, I know, yeah, let's see, I'll put a little bit of pink in this gravel here, so like that. Boom, boom. But not too much. That's almost a little bit too saturated, so I'm going to wipe off my brush and come back with just water to kind of smooth that out. See? Soften that a little bit. Okay, now you can see that that's just enough pink to make that foreground element come forward a little bit more. And you can see how the darkness also makes the foreground come a little bit more. Now, if I wanted to mess this up, what I could do is I could come in here into the background and paint like a tree or something, or like a house, and make it all detailed and dark and warm and saturated and contrasty. And that would all of a sudden leap forward from the background into the foreground and ruin any sense of depth that this this drawing has. So I'm going to stop there for this part, and I'm going to do like an I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of or something. There's still a lot of moisture on this, so you have to be careful closing up your palette while there's still so much liquid in there. So I'm going to set that on the ground. If you do put that into your kit while it's still wet, it can leak out. And what happened to me recently is some paint leaked out because I put my palette away too wet. Sometimes when you're in the field, you have no choice but to put it away with a little bit of that moisture. And then you get these pieces of paint, see, that got on my viewfinder. And then these can get on your finger, and then you can touch your paper. I think there's like little pieces of pigment right there. Touch your paper and it smears these colors, and you're like, where did that color come from? And if you have a drawing that you're really precious about, then it just sucks. So I'm going to try to get this off of here, because that's not ideal for sure. Okay. That's my viewfinder. That would have been good for the drawing of this. I didn't use it right now. All right, now I'm going to switch cameras. All right, so that was really fun, and I feel good. I got some stuff down on my paper, and so it's a good start to do something kind of like an overview or sort of like a big picture thing. It's been a little more than 20 minutes. I also have my metadata, my location, the date. No one reminded me what the date was. Is it? I think it's the yeah, the 27th. So let me write that in. And I've got, you know, basic weather and this sort of overview and a title. So that's a good start. So what do you think would be a good thing to do next? Maybe I already said. 12, 27. Any ideas from the audience? Okay. No ideas from the 17 people at least that are watching. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to do like a zooming in thing. So I've got my binocular, my close focus binoculars right here. And if you didn't get these, if you're a nature journaler and you didn't get these for yourself for Christmas, then there's something wrong with you. And but actually, no, there's nothing wrong with you. You can still buy them for your birthday or sooner, because these are an essential nature journaling tool. They're so cool because you can use them for birds and animals and stuff like that, whatever, of course. I even looked at the planetary conjunction using them, And these also are super good for close focus. So like 1/2 meter is the limit for close focus. A lot of binoculars, you can't focus on things until they're like 6 meters away, maybe something like that. Anyways, this is like a 1/2 meter right here. So that means that I can be looking at succulents right here and noticing their texture and things like that, because I'm looking through them with my binoculars. So I'm just going to go ahead and look at this one for a little bit, and maybe I'll start thinking of some ideas of what to nature journal. You can, spend some time every once in a while just observing, and sometimes out of that you'll get an idea of what to look at next. So these leaves look pretty basic, unmagnified, but I'm looking at that edge, and there's definitely things that I could notice about this plant that would be worth nature journaling up close. I could do like a zoom in section. I'm also noticing a lot of this water, the dissolved solids from water on the leaves where it's evaporated. The water's evaporated and left that. Oh, they're so much softer when you get to the top. This one's like way softer than these other ones. Anyways, there's a lot of cool things I can notice about this plant. I could zoom in. I could do like cross sections. I could try to cut it up. Another thing you could do for like a long-term nature journaling project with succulents is to do propagation experiments, or just propagate them normally and just nature journal the process. So as you probably know, succulents are a lot of these succulents, I'll go on my rant later about what succulents even means, but a lot of these plants are really easy to propagate from cuttings. So like this branch right here, you could suspend over a cup of water and roots will start to grow out the bottom, and that would be something that you can nature journal, sort of the way that Kate Rudder did with her avocado journal. If you haven't seen that interview, definitely check that one out, called Avocado Journaling. But she basically sprouted an avocado seed and nature journaled it every day. And that's something you could do with one of these succulents. And there's so many kinds. Like here's another kind right here that's really easy to propagate this way. And this kind of thing on your windowsill is something you could look at even if it's wintertime and you live somewhere where you can't get outside easily. This kind of thing would be really cool to nature journal and just to look at on a daily basis and have that access to nature even if you're living in an apartment. I'm going to check out the comments. I see people are posting some comments. So thanks. I see my mom's on here. Hi, Mom. And Facebook user, it's Arlie. Hi, Arlie. Thanks for noticing the piece about the importance of your first entry and the effect that it has. I'm glad you got something out of that, Arlie. And then Amanda is making a really good point. So I always listen for birds and other sounds. Really good point, Amanda. So if I wanted to, what I could do right now is, this would be a perfect way to fill up this area actually. So I can take my gray pen and make sort of like a thought cloud. And what I can do here, this is a really fun thing to do, and a good way to channel your ADD is to have sort of this sidebar where like I can, every time I hear a bird, I could just do this for bird sounds, for example, or I could just do it for other things that are happening. But Amanda's pointing out like a whole nother sense that I haven't included in here at all. And I mean, you can't really hear like succulents very well. Succulents, well, actually they do. Sometimes they squeak when you rub your fingers on them. But for the most part, there's not much sound coming from them. But sound is an important thing when you're trying to get this sort of like environmental perspective, or sort of this like establishing shot. And so I could maybe under here just write like a few words about the sounds, or I could have something up here where I just have a constant running log of all of the plants, birds that I see, or birds that I hear. But I think I'm going to try this. This is something I have never done before, but I think I'm going to try just putting a few words, almost like, some kind of simplified poem of some of the sounds, just to put them right underneath this to kind of give the perspective of the place. So let's see. I have been hearing crow sounds. dog walkers, and smoke. All right, so I just put 4 words that kind of, not 4 words, but three concepts or 3 sounds or 3 environmental things from the area that I'm in. That's something I've never tried before. And just to kind of give a little bit of sense of space. And that doesn't take that much work, but that actually adds a lot of information. Oh, Nature Sketches, Anita has a question about growing succulents. Oh, it sounds like you might not have enough sun. If the succulents keep growing up but don't widen out, it's probably because they don't have enough sun, which is a limiting factor if you're in a house. Good question. Okay, so I've got this now, and I've got a little bit of information. I've got this thing up here for birds or whatever. This could also be if you're having a lot of like distracting thoughts or something during your nature journaling session. You could just have a box like this in the corner, and whenever that stuff comes up, you could write it there. Like you could write, I'm hungry, feet cold, being hard on myself about my watercolor. And so what this does, you know, this, especially if it's about your own thought process, practicing writing this down, it's venting, so it gets it out of your head, which helps, but it's also just building your meta-awareness skills, your metacognitive skills. And so just practicing that is a really, really useful thing, because those skills are helpful in all areas of life. So anyways, just keep this. You could just keep a box like this here whenever you're nature journaling, and you could put distracting thoughts into there. Okay, so now let's look at some more actual succulents. I think I want to look at these ones right here. And then after I draw that for a little bit and zoom in and out on them, I will talk a little bit about some of the botany. So these have a really, really cool structure, and I think I'm going to use the document camera for this part. But they have a really cool repetitive structure, and that's one of the fun things about succulents is they have a repetitive structure, so they're often easier to draw than some other plants or trees that aren't as repetitive, and that can be fun. And it can also be dangerous because you get into the pattern, you're like, oh, I get the pattern, and then you just start repeating something over and over again and not paying attention to what you're looking at. So don't forget to look at the thing. I lost it. Also, if you're into other types of artwork or design, or like creating patterns for fabric or things like that, succulents would be a really cool place to look, because there's so much going on with them. So let's see if I can get this to focus on here. That's pretty good. So I'm going to do an I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, just out loud. And so this is something you can do with kids who find drawing or writing or even holding a pencil really difficult still. You don't want it to feel like they're doing something impossible all the time. So having some nature journaling that you can do that doesn't require this other skill that they're still developing at the same time. One thing you can do is this I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. So this can be done with really young kids and people who don't draw, or if you just have a short amount of time. So what you do first is, oh no, it's already breaking. Piece fell off. So what you do first is you say things that you notice about it. And that's not like, I notice this is a succulent. That's, or what you notice is what you directly observe. And there's a difference between that and inferences and knowledge. So those are all things you've heard somewhere else or memorized somewhere else or believe about something. But for the I notice, you just do, you specifically only do things you observe. So I'm going to write over here like really big, I notice. And the crazy thing is, when you practice this with people in our society, you realize that a lot of people don't really, or we don't really make the distinction between what we see directly and what we know. And so a lot of people confuse those two things. But in nature, it's really important to pay attention to what you actually see and not what you know or think you know. Okay, so I notice, I'm just going to say like really kindergarten stuff, like a repeating pattern. And you can write this down, but you don't have to. And then instead of saying, I notice flowers up here, because they probably are flowers, like I probably am right in that assumption. But instead of saying that, I'm going to just say what I actually observe. See how there's a difference there? So what I actually observe are like these brownish and yellow things that appear only near the top of this branch or whatever. So instead of saying that those are flowers, because they might not be, and this is the part where you start being wrong, and then you start having confirmation bias a lot of times, because you start nature journaling about this or talking about this as if these are flowers, and later, and that creates a bias in our brains that everybody experiences called the confirmation bias. And I'm going to write it over here. I'm going to write it up here in my distraction box up here. Perfect. Confirmation bias, okay? And this is a real problem with science and with other things in life, but the way your brain works is not, your brain is not designed to find truth. Oops, can you even see that? So I wrote up here in my distraction box. Your brain is not designed to find truth. Your brain is, your brain is not, finding truth is not like the thing that your brain is best at. Your brain is best at helping you survive and pass on your genes. And so what happens is we have certain ways of thinking that could be beneficial in certain situations, but not in others. So for example, confirmation bias that I just wrote down helps you be sure of things and more confident and not just constantly second guessing what you know. And most of the times that works fine for us. But if I go on a premise that these are flowers and then I start making observations about them, my brain's going to start filtering out information that tells me they're not flowers. So anyways, in nature journaling, it's good to practice thinking about things in that way and not jumping to conclusions. So instead of saying that I notice flowers on it, I could even just say, I notice flower-like structures. Now I'm going to ruin my pattern of writing. Flower-like structures. Okay, and so I think this is really important to model with kids, because kids, especially in nature, they look at adults as some kind of encyclopedias that should know everything. And so you have options. You can pretend to be that encyclopedia and you're the one that knows everything, or you can show your kids that you don't know everything either, and that you're curious about it. So instead of, feeling sort of like you need to prove that you know everything to the kids, it's a perfect chance to just be like, okay, that's interesting. I'm not sure. Those look like flowers. And so nature journaling, we practice this a lot. And the next step would be to go to I wonder. And so in I wonder, you can ask, is it a flower? And our society is way more invested in confidence than curiosity, and a lot of times people conviction also. And what we should be is better at asking questions. And they've done studies on how many questions people ask, and people after the age of like 5 ask fewer and fewer questions. And by the time they're in high school, a lot of people aren't asking any questions during the course of the day. So curiosity is getting lost in our schooling system. Okay, so I wonder, like I do this exercise with some people and they literally are looking at a plant and can't come up with any questions. But if you do this with a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, they'll ask you tons of questions. So I'm just going to start with the basic one. I wonder if those are flowers. when you think you know something, you can also just frame it as a question. And that's a good practice also, and keeps your mind a little bit more open. How fast does it grow? What else? Does anything eat it? Anything eat it? Ah. What else? Does it need a lot of water? Or what time? When does it flower? If it flowers? Oh, does it reproduce sexually? Because if it makes flowers, does it actually reproduce sexually? Most people just propagate succulents by cuttings. Okay, and then it reminds me of is the place where you can bring in your outside information or make other like associations. So so what is this? So this would be the other place that you can take things you think you know and put in flowers. So the structures remind me of flowers. So if you're with a group and you have someone who's sort of like a know-it-all, you can tell them that the I notice stage is not for what you think you know or have memorized. This is for what you directly observe. So if they keep saying like a species name or something like that, that's not an actual I notice, then tell them, don't worry, this is it reminds me of is when you can say those things. Like it reminds me of Crassulaceae or whatever. Um, the structures remind me of flowers. Okay, it reminds me of sort of like a noodle. Food comparisons are always good for memory. So when I'm with kids and I'm trying to help them remember something, or with adults, if I make a food comparison, it's kind of reminding me of a French fry now too. Those will help you when you make these. It reminds me of it connects with other parts of your brain and helps you remember. French fry. So it reminds me sort of a French fry. Okay, now the next thing I could do, so I've basically filled this page, as you can see, and now that that page is full, I could probably go on to the next page and do like a zoom in or something like that. And a zoom in would be really cool on this particular plant. I haven't even really looked at it with my binoculars yet, but these flower structures, for example, I might be able to answer my question. So that's another thing that we don't always talk about in the nature journaling community is we talk about asking all these questions, and it is useful just to ask questions for the sake of asking questions. But sometimes we should think about like, are these questions that we can answer, or are we going to try to answer them? And if so, are we going to answer them ourselves, or are we going to try to look up that information? So this question about whether these are flowers or not on this plant, that is a question that I could probably answer myself without Googling it. And so it's really important, especially if you're working with kids, to model that things sometimes can be answered in other ways. And if they can't, that's legit too. Some questions don't have answers to them, or they don't have answers yet. So looking at questions from a couple different ways and not just looking it up on Google right away. But this question of whether these are flowers, I plan on trying to answer that right now. So what are flowers? They're reproductive structures, right? So if I can find some of the anatomical parts that define a reproductive structure on here, then I can say they're flowers. So what kinds of parts would that be? Well, ovaries would be one, petals, pistils, stamens, those kind of things. And I think I am seeing those. And it looks like there's 5 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. So if they're not calyxes. So 5-part symmetry. Different plants have different types of symmetry, and I have some videos about nature journaling plants and plant families you should check out, because as soon as you understand plant families, you'll realize this whole thing about succulents is a big, big lie. So just kidding, but what you realize is once you start studying plant families, you realize that a lot of the categories that we come up for with plants have different meanings. And so categories are really useful. And this is going to be my rant for the day. This is a good nature journaling page, nature journaled succulents quite a bit. There's a lot of different things you can do, be creative. But right now I'm going to talk just a little bit about the botany of them, because they're not all closely related, and succulents is more of a descriptive category. So something that is succulent, you can eat a succulent apple, okay? So something that is succulent, it refers to like the texture of it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that those plants are closely related. So what it is this is an adaptation that is useful for plants from many different families that aren't closely related. It's a adaptation that is useful in certain conditions. So a lot of times succulents grow near the coast, or they grow in dry areas. So you can find plants near you that even that same species of plant growing near the coast will be more succulent, or a close relative will be succulent. So I'm going to talk about a few of the families that I actually know. A lot of them I don't. And then I'm going to talk about cactus and what cactus is and what cactus isn't. So I think a lot of people think that if it has spines on it, it's a cactus. That's not the case. This, for example, here is an agave, which is more closely related to lilies and to asparagus, it turns out, than it is to cactus. So if you see this plant right here, yes, it is covered in spines, and some people might call this a cactus. Some people might call it succulent. This is an agave, and if you look at the flower, I posted some on my Instagram recently. If you look at the flower, you'll see that it has a 3-part symmetry and is much more similar to a lily than to a cactus. And I have shown cactus flowers before on my YouTube. Okay, so that's the this family used to be called, if you just think of them as agaves, that's good. And it's in the it used to be the Agavaceae or the Liliaceae, and now it's the someone just told me on Instagram it's the Asparagaceae. So this is more closely related to asparagus than a cactus. Okay, next one is the and this is one that everybody knows. So a lot of people have these jade plants right here. So super easy to grow. You could just stick this in the ground, and this would be a really good practice for 3-dimensional shapes, like when you're drawing trees and stuff. See how it has the rings around it? If you haven't seen, I have a YouTube video all about drawing trees, and I talk about how important these rings are for when you're drawing in perspective. And this is Crassulaceae, and they often have a really simple growth form with opposite leaves. So that's another thing for determining plant families, is you can see up here especially that these 2 bottom leaves are straight across from each other. Then the next set are exactly opposite to that, at right angles to that, and are also in matching pairs. So that's the Crassulaceae, and I don't have flowers of any of these ones right now. Oh wait, I see some flowers. Come here. Okay, this is a different, actually this is probably the same species of Crassulaceae right here. Same opposite leaves, and this one is flowering, and the flowers are really what help you know the family. And flowers, so there's 5 petals, and I think 5 of the male parts and everything like that. So, ooh, and there's cool aphids on it. This would be fun to come over here and nature journal this one, but I'm just going to keep going on this plant family piece. So that's Crassulaceae. I believe this one that I showed earlier, this is also Crassulaceae. That family might have actually changed, but I haven't been paying attention to that. Now here's a good example of, like, look at this plant over here, is very succulent. See how succulent these leaves are? But look at the flowers, okay? This is a totally different family. And do these yellow flowers remind you of anything? So this, to me, this looks like the Asteraceae. So this is actually the sunflower family right here. And these flowers have numerous, they actually have numerous flowers inside of what looks like a single flower. Sorry, the lighting's getting kind of rough over here. But this is actually a totally different, unrelated family that's also called succulents. So this is the thing about succulents, is it's not really that useful of a plant category. So a lot of and this is an example of this tree right here. People wouldn't call this a succulent, but this is in the Euphorbiaceae, which has many species that are called succulents. So it's really confusing to people when they realize that that category is actually just sort of a descriptive category. It would be like having a category of plants called greens, or a family of plants called fuzzies. You know, like if there was just a bunch of plants that everyone called fuzzies because they have fuzz on their leaves. That sounds really, really silly, but that's basically what succulents are. So I just recommend, you know, if you use the term succulent, to realize how limited of a term that is from a botanical perspective. It could be useful in some ways, but not that much. And then as far as cactus goes, things that have spines are not necessarily cactus. So like that tree I just showed you, this has a bunch of species in this family that are really spiny, and people call them cactus, but they're not. And if you saw the flowers, you would know. So the cactus is really most easily defined. So these ones have spines, right? But there's a lot of cactus that don't have spines. And it's actually the flowers and the way the flowers look. There's tons of petals, so what's called numerous petals. You wouldn't want to count them, not like that other plant that has 5. You wouldn't want to count them. Well, maybe you would if you're OCD and stuff like that. But you probably wouldn't want to count all of them. You wouldn't want to count the male parts, and they produce a lot of seed in their fruit. And those are sort of the main characteristics. They're not all spiny. So anyways, just a little rant about cactus and succulents. And if you have some succulents at home, great. Make more of them. Try nature journaling them. If you don't have any succulents yet, go get some, because you can literally start with a piece like this. I think when I was in middle school, I used to go around neighborhoods and pick them from other people's plants and then start them. Sometimes you can just stick it straight into dirt, or if you have a little cup at home, be a great thing to do with your kids, great thing to do during quarantine or during the winter. So hope you learned something from this video. Check out some of my other videos. I have a whole bunch about plants, how to nature journal, and how to do watercolor. So really fun live. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks Emmanuel. Thanks Ella. Thanks Nature Sketches, Amanda, Ricky, my mom, Roberta, and everybody. Have a good day. Bye. Bye.